Hold on to your forks. Forks, folks, the food pyramid, that towering symbol eh, of dietary wisdom, has been by the Department of Health and Human. It's transforming villains into heroes and reshaping our plates in ways you won't believe. In today's adrenaline filled episode of Thursday Night Live, we'll dissect the drama, debunk the myths, and reveal how these challenges could supercharge your health. Are you ready to eat your way to truth? Then welcome to tonight's episode of Thursday Night Live. Okay, I'm back. So I don't know if you heard any music because I didn't hear any music on my end, but hopefully it was there and you got to like groove along to the sound. So today I'm going to talk about the food pyramid. So a couple of weeks ago, Robert F. Kennedy, in his position as the head of Health and Human Services, released a new food pyramid. Now I want to talk about where we were and then move on to where we are now. And so in 1992, although I believe there was a food pyramid prior to 1992, we're going to go with the last food pyramid, 1992. And basically, it showed a pyramid, and then each layer of the pyramid had a different food group. And as the pyramid got smaller, it meant that you should eat less and less of these foods. So the bottom level of the pyramid was grains, followed by veggies, and then fruit, then dairy, then meat, and at the very tippy top of the pyramid was fats. And I think for most people, we really didn't pay much attention to the food pyramid. I mean, not that I don't think anybody I know has studied it or could say like these are the levels, except the big takeaway: meat and fats are bad. Don't eat them. Bad. And what's interesting is that based on this methodology, they suggested 6 to 11 servings of grain every day, which I can't even imagine that. So 6 to 11 servings of basically some kind of carbohydrate, which they aren't real clear what those should be. And the narrative tied to it is carbs, so carbohydrates, provide essential energy and align with the historical diet, which makes me laugh because you know that I'm into my ancient history. So the historical diet, so grains, wheat, really didn't come into the human food vocabulary till about 10,000 years ago, or, you know, with the advent of the Fertile Crescent and the growing of wheat and the development of grains for consumption. I mean, they were around prior, but they weren't farmed in the way they are. And it's interesting because at the same time, and I did a whole video on this topic, wheat was in the Middle East, rice was in Asia, and corn was in the Americas. So 3 heavy grain products that all came to the forefront in the food narrative around 10,000 years ago. Now, they totally neglect what people ate for millennia before that, which is they were basically hunters and gatherers. So they ate a lot of meat or they ate a lot of vegetables, but a grain was something that was precious. You know, if you sit there and look at a piece of wheat. So I'm just trying to think of like bulgur wheat. You can get that, or couscous or quinoa. I mean, they're little tiny grains, and so they would, from what I understand, they would go and collect these grains and store them up, and then like for Christmas, they would have a grain as part of their meal because it was a special event or a holiday. It wasn't like you had like meat and potatoes or, rice and beans, because there was no farming. And so you just collected what you found. And so it was more of a delicacy than a regular staple in the diet, up until about 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution that occurred around the world. Now, what's interesting when you research this just a smidge is that you find out that there was actually, in this 1992, just prior to 1992, when they were developing this version of the food pyramid, they originally 3 to 4 servings of grain. But this recommendation, and that seems better, it seems more natural, but this recommendation was overruled before it was released, and that number was bumped up to the 6 to 11. And so you would think, well, they had scientific research to support this notion, and great minds came together to identify you really need 6 to 11 and not 3 to 4. But that would be a misnomer on your part. Portions, the number of portions to be consumed was heavily, heavily influenced by the USDA, or the Department of Agriculture, in order to sell more products. I mean, they're responsible for the people that are growing wheat or growing corn or growing whatever they're growing. And so to sell more product, they sat there and kind of pushed to have that number pushed up. But they weren't the only ones. It was also subverted by the food manufacturers. So, and the manufacturer would lead you to believe that Pop-Tarts are part of a healthy breakfast. But even with the beginning, like even the notion, okay, that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and you should have some Kellogg's cornflakes, which was promoted by the manufacturers, was actually a promotional campaign for people to get people to eat breakfast, which included these grain cereals that were now available in stores. So it wasn't necessarily, I mean, this is the part that's sick. It wasn't ever necessarily about your health. It was really about what can we push and what can we get to slide through. And we'll just program people. It's like, oh, Pop-Tarts are good. You want them. So that has all changed. And so what do we have now? And basically the food pyramid has flipped over. So now it looks like an upside down pyramid, which is kind of weird, but that's okay. And so at the top of the pyramid, so at the widest part of the pyramid, we actually have meats and fats. And I'm going to come back to this in a second. Meats and fats, followed by fruits and veggies, and then grains on the bottom. So that is the proportion that they recommend of these foods. Now, but there's another key point that goes with this food pyramid, and that is the notion that if you're eating refined food, so if you're getting your protein from McDonald's, and that's what you're eating for your meat, then, are you really eating anything healthy? The same thing about oil. You hear Robert Kennedy talking about cooking fries in tallow. So tallow is rendered beef fat, which according to some people is actually, it is healthier for you than consuming canola oil or some other seed oil, which actually accelerates inflammation in the body and arterial sclerosis, right up there with margarine. So don't eat butter, which has fats in it, but they're not necessarily bad fats, and eat margarine that gives you secondary issues to the fat consumption. So we're in a little bit of a flux now, but anyway, let me keep going. And then when we talk about grains in particular, I mean, fruits and vegetables, that's pretty self-explanatory. You eat an apple, you eat some broccoli. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then grains, they're not, okay, so other than they're suggesting that the amount of carbohydrates out of grains is the smallest part, but they're also suggesting that these grains should be whole grains, brown rice, quinoa, as opposed to spaghetti and other highly processed foods. And of this whole thing, so to me, of this whole thing is looking at your diet. Because one of the things that they are trying to do is to reduce health concerns, because the Americans are sick. Americans have terrible diets, and chronic disease runs rampant in this country. And the amount of medications that people take far exceed what you find in other countries that eat a better diet. And so they changed the food pyramid, which I'm okay with. I think that you have to really look at it and get a deeper understanding of what it means. But to me, the bigger thing is paying attention and cutting out the fast foods, the chemically laden foods, the pre-processed foods that have led Americans to their current health crisis. Did you know, and this was a startling fact, and it's at least 60% of the foods that you find in the supermarket are pre-processed, chemically laden, convenient food that do not support health of the body. Think about that, 60%. So if you're someone like me, I mean, I eat the edges. I go to the meat department. I would say dairy, but I don't do dairy, and the vegetable department. And every so often I'll get some rice and beans or some other stuff. But there are aisles in the supermarket that I never, ever walk down. And I would say when talking about just the food section of the store, it's at least half of those aisles that I never go down or rarely go down. I might be looking for something specific for a specific meal, which is kind of like, okay, this tastes really good, so I'm just going to get it and have it, but it's not a daily food item that I'm consuming. So take this new food pyramid in and kind of reflect on it, and maybe, well, people didn't pay attention to it before. I'm not sure that people are going to pay all that much attention to it now, but I'm hoping that the takeaway from it is for you to start looking at the foods that you're eating and decide, do I want to feed and nurture my body and give it things that are going to promote health? Or am I just going to put anything inside of it and not really care what it's doing to me, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent? So there's a bit of controversy about the food pyramid being flipped over, and I'm really not sure what's going to happen, especially to food manufacturers. If you're the person making the Pop-Tarts or these other foods, frozen bean and cheese burritos, who knows, things with textured vegetable protein in the store, I don't know what's going to happen to them. My solace in this whole thing is, the government isn't going to ban them from being sold, but in the same breath, I don't see people's relationship with foods going like an on-off switch, that they're going from this food pyramid to this food pyramid. But it is my hope that as time goes on and more information is being given to the American public, which it finally is, they are finally talking about diet and nutrition, that over time, as we learn healthier ways of eating, that these food manufacturers will have time to incorporate better food choices, healthier food choices, and I'm going to say at a fairer price. Anyway, so that's my thing for today. I hope you take that in and maybe sit there and look at what you're eating and start making, we're talking about that 2026, bringing in the new year. So that might be something that you put on your radar to start looking at and making healthier food choices for yourself as this year moves on. Okay. So one of the things that I talked about last week, but I made a graphic so it makes more sense, is some changes that are in the show now. And if I can find my cursor. Okay. All right, where's my graphic? There we go. Okay, so there are new ways that you can interact with this show. Obviously, you can go into the chat and request a reading and give me a number between 1 and 3, which is the number of times I will shuffle the cards on your behalf. Depending on when you get here, or if you want to, you can, I did not put that in here. You can go to soulhealer.com /live, soulhealer.com/live. I guess I need to fix this graphic already. And request a one-on-one. And so the things you can do is you can jump the line, which means if I get a message that you've jumped the line, I will do your reading the next one up. So if you think that you're at the bottom of the list, you get concierge service out of it. The other thing you can do by going to soulhealer.com/live is ask Dr. Rita. And so you can go and actually type in a question and I'll read your question on air and give a very specific answer. So right now I'm doing just general readings, but if there's something, you're in a relationship and you want to know what's going on, or you have a question about your work, feel free to go to soulhealer.com and ask Dr. Rita Louise. Now, I will say I don't predict the future and I don't talk to dead people. So that's the only 2 caveats, but you can ask me about anything else. And also on that page, if you want to leave me a little something, you can leave me a tip. So that's new for this year. And I'll just keep talking about it. And I'm going to change this graphic a little bit, even though it looks so great. We'll go from there. Okay. All right, now I'm just going to do my regular thing. God, I wish I could get rid of this thing here. Okay.